My name is Marlene. I'm 57 years old, and for most of my life I've kept things simple. I have believed in the quiet rhythm of a well-tended garden, the satisfying order of a library shelf, and the comfortable warmth of a long marriage. I married young, raised 2 kids who now have kids of their own, and filled the quiet spaces of my days with routines that became the bedrock of my existence. I never went looking for drama, and I sure as hell never imagined that love or longing or the chaotic, unpredictable currents of the human heart would find me again after all these years. Not in that way. I truly believed that chapter of my life, the one filled with breathless moments and unspoken desires, had closed long ago. But then something happened. Something I still can't fully explain. I never thought something like this could happen to me. But it did. And I'm telling you this story as a quiet warning and as a surprising gentle hope. Please don't make the same mistake I did and assume that your story is already over. Before we begin this journey into the heart of an unexpected connection, I want to invite you to join ours. If you believe in stories that explore the quiet, often overlooked moments that change our lives forever, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click that notification bell. It means the world to us and allows us to continue sharing these truths with you. It was an early Thursday evening when I heard the knock, a sharp, almost frantic sound that cut through the quiet of my house. I'd just finished tidying the kitchen, still humming to myself from a song on the oldies station on the radio. I figured it was my neighbor Diane coming back for the ceramic baking dish she'd left after our dinner the night before. She and her husband Peter had come over for a simple meal of pot roast, and conversation, a little neighborhood tradition we kept alive over the 20-plus years we'd lived side by side. But when I opened the door, a welcoming smile already on my face, it wasn't Diane standing there. It was Peter. Alone. His eyes were puffy and bloodshot, the kind of visceral red that doesn't come from a simple lack of sleep, but from a long, soul-draining cry. I could smell the sharp, sour tang of whiskey on his breath before he even spoke a sentence so out of place for him for this time of day. Marlene. He said, his voice a hoarse, broken thing I barely recognized. I didn't know where else to go. It wasn't like him. Peter was the kind of man who always had a joke ready, the kind who spent his Saturdays meticulously mowing his lawn, who waved at you from across the street like you were family. He was solid, predictable, safe. Seeing him like this unsteady on my welcome mat, his usual cheerful composure completely shattered. Vulnerable sent a cold, uneasy ripple down my spine. I opened the door wider without thinking. Peter, come in. He stepped inside and stood awkwardly in the middle of my living room, as if he wasn't sure whether to sit down or run away. I closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch seeming deafeningly loud in the sudden heavy silence. I waited. After a long, agonizing moment, he finally said it, the words seeming to tear their way out of his throat. She left. I blinked, processing. Diane. He just nodded, swallowing hard as Adam's apple bobbing. Packed a bag this morning while I was in the shower. Said she was going to her sister's in Arizona. She said she needs time. I felt my heart sink. I had no idea they'd been having trouble. They'd always seemed so solid, so in sync. More than just neighbors, they were our friends. Theirs was the kind of comfortable, easy, laughing love that I had once long ago shared with my own husband. Do you want to sit? I offered gently. Peter nodded again and sank onto the edge of my couch, perching there as if he were afraid it might swallow him whole. I followed and sat across from him in the familiar comfort of my armchair, wrapping my cardigan a little tighter around myself, a sudden chill having nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous, repetitive motion. I'm sorry for just showing up like this. I didn't know who else to talk to. It's okay, I said, and I meant it. Of course it's okay. But I also felt something else, a strange tightening feeling in my chest. The air in my quiet, orderly living room felt heavier, charged with a grief that was not my own, but that resonated with a deep, dormant part of my soul. She said she's been unhappy for years. Peter continued, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the floral pattern of my rug. That I've been too busy, too checked out, that I stopped seeing her. I don't know. I thought we were fine. I searched his face, my mind a blank, unsure of what to say, what comfort I could possibly offer. I knew what a slow, quiet drifting apart felt like. My own marriage to my late husband Dan had ended in silence too, not in shouting matches or slammed doors. Just a gradual creeping absence, the kind that starts with forgetting to say goodnight and ends with two separate lives being lived under the same roof. He looked up at me, then his eyes, soft but hollow, lost. "You ever feel like you missed your cue, Marlene? Like you were supposed to say or do something different at a certain moment, 1,000 different certain moments, but you didn't, and now you'll never get that moment back." I nodded slowly, the truth of his words a familiar ache in my own heart. "More times than I'd like to admit." Peter leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his broad shoulders slumping. "I keep thinking back to all the little moments, like they were blinking warning lights on a dashboard that I just ignored. The way she'd get quiet at dinner, the way she stopped asking me about my day. I just thought she'd always be there." The room was quiet again. Outside, a wind chime I'd had for years jingled lazily in the dusk breeze, a sound that usually brought me comfort, but now sounded lonely, melancholic. I don't know how long we sat like that, two middle-aged people in a quiet living room, both of us thinking about our separate lives and the roads we didn't take. Something shifted in that silence. A closeness I hadn't expected. I could feel the immense weight of his grief mixing with something else in the air. Something unspoken. Something that felt surprisingly like recognition. I rose slowly from my chair. "Let me make you some tea," I said, needing an action, something simple and practical to anchor me. He didn't respond, just nodded, his eyes still fixed on the floor, as if he were afraid that if he looked up, they might betray something he wasn't ready to show. In the kitchen, my hands trembled as I filled the kettle. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just the raw intimacy of the moment of bearing witness to a friend's world falling apart. Or maybe it was because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just seeing Peter as my neighbor, as Diane's husband. I was seeing him as a man, a grieving, broken man, and I wasn't ready for what that unexpected recognition stirred deep inside me. I brought the tea into the living room on a small tray and placed his cup on the coffee table with a quiet clink. The warm, fragrant steam curled up between us, mingling with the heavy silence. Peter looked up and gave me a faint watery smile, tired but deeply grateful. "Thank you," he said softly. I sat back in my armchair and wrapped my own fingers around my mug, letting the heat ground me. The room was dim now, touched only by the warm orange glow of the lamp beside me. The rest of the world, with its noise and its demands, felt very far away. He took a sip of his tea, then leaned back against the cushions with a long, slow, shuddering breath. "It's strange," he murmured. "You spend 35 years with someone, and when they're gone, the house doesn't even feel like yours anymore. It's just a collection of rooms." I watched him carefully. "Have you talked to anyone else?" "A friend. Maybe your brother." He just shook his head. "I couldn't bring myself to. I'd have to explain to justify. With you, it's different." That made my chest tighten again. I didn't ask him what he meant by that. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Not yet. There was something about grief that made people reach for warmth for a safe harbor. And there was something about being truly seen, truly listened to, that made you feel like you were standing at the edge of something both dangerous and thrilling. Peter set his mug down and looked around my living room. "You haven't changed much in here since Dan passed, have you?" I blinked. The name spoken so softly in this quiet room hit harder than I expected. Dan had been gone for almost 9 years now. Sometimes it felt like just yesterday that he was standing in this very room teasing me about my overwatered ferns. Other times it felt like a whole other life. "No," I said quietly. Somehow I couldn't. Peter just nodded as if he understood completely. "You always seemed so peaceful, like you'd made your peace with it all." "I did," I said, though my voice didn't sound entirely convincing even to my own ears. "Eventually, but I still have days where I walk into a room and expect him to be there. Days where I set 2 places at the dinner table without even thinking." His eyes softened, and he looked down at his own hands, large and capable, now resting uselessly on his knees. "I've been watching you for years, you know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not in a weird way," he added quickly. Just noticing. From across the street. The way you work in your garden. The way you always seem to carry yourself with a certain calm. A calm after the storm. It gave me hope, I think. I wasn't sure what to say to that. Compliments from men had stopped feeling real a long time ago. They were usually about appearance or charm, things that felt superficial. But this felt different. This was something deeper. Something that saw through the carefully constructed layers of contented widowhood I tried to keep tucked away. The silence stretched between us again, but this time it was charged thick with unspoken things, with years of unexamined lives. Peter cleared his throat. "I should probably go," he said, his voice regaining a bit of its usual strength. "I didn't mean to stay this long to dump all this on you." I stood with him, walking him to the door. As he stepped onto the porch, he paused and turned back to me. His face looked torn, as though he were wrestling with one last thing he needed to say. "Marlene!" He began, then stopped. His jaw tightened. I waited. He finally said, "Last night after dinner, I had this moment, watching you laugh at one of my dumb stories, hearing you talk about your library volunteering. I realized something. I haven't felt that kind of ease in a very long time." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My heart was thudding against my ribs in a way that felt too loud, too young for a woman of my age. He gave me a gentle, sad smile, his eyes shining with something tender and raw. "I'm sorry if that's out of line. I needed to say it." I stepped out onto the porch with him, the cool night air brushing against my bare arms. "It's not out of line," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "It's honest." We stood there, not touching, not moving, just seeing each other in a way we never had before, across 30 years of neighborhood barbecues and casual waves. Then he nodded a final silent acknowledgement and stepped down the porch steps. He walked back across the lawn, a lonely silhouette moving toward the dark, quiet shape of his own house. I watched him until he vanished behind his front door. Then I stood there for a long moment, my heart still racing, unsure of what line had just been crossed, but knowing deep in my bones that something between us had fundamentally changed. And I wasn't sure I could ever go back to pretending that it hadn't. The next morning the world felt different. The light filtering through my kitchen blinds seemed softer, hazier, as if the world itself was uncertain, hovering between shadow and sun. I stirred my coffee slowly, staring out at my backyard, watching the breeze ripple through the faded blue fabric of the patio umbrella. The same backyard where Peter and Diane and Dan and I had once hosted summer barbecues, where the sound of our shared laughter had spilled over the fences like music. But now the air felt too still, too expectant. I hadn't slept well. I'd replayed Peter's words over and over again, like a record with a scratch. That moment on the porch, it kept looping in my mind. The way he looked at me, not like a neighbor, but like a man who'd been holding back something real for too long. I should have felt guilty. Maybe a small, distant part of me did. Diane wasn't a stranger. She was a friend. She hadn't filed for divorce. She wasn't gone forever. She was just gone for now. But guilt wasn't the loudest voice in my head. It was something else. A profound, aching curiosity, a deep, resonant loneliness, and yes, something tender that I hadn't dared to give a name to in almost a decade. By midday, I was out back kneeling in the dirt, pulling stubborn weeds from the edge of my flower bed, my hands moving with an automatic, familiar rhythm. It was a grounding task, something that usually calmed my mind. But today my thoughts were a tangled mess. I heard a soft cough from the other side of the fence. I looked up, and there he was again, Peter standing just on the other side, holding a small, dusty cardboard box. "Morning," I called out, brushing the dirt from my gardening gloves. I found this in the attic while I was sorting through some things," he said, his voice a little hesitant. "Some old gardening books. Figured you might get more use out of them than I would." He lifted the box slightly, as if to justify his visit. But we both knew it wasn't really about the books. I smiled a real warm smile. "Sure, bring them over." A minute later, he was standing on my porch again, just like last night. Only this time, in the bright light of day, the weight on his shoulders seemed a little lighter, his eyes a little less haunted. I invited him in, and we sat at my sun-drenched kitchen table flipping through the dusty volumes, half-heartedly pretending that that was all we were there for. "Are you okay today?" I asked, my voice gentle. He exhaled a long, slow breath. "Better. I think saying it all out loud yesterday helped. And being here." There was a pause. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line yesterday," he said carefully, his eyes on mine. "I don't want to make things complicated for you." "You didn't," I said. Then after a beat, my own honesty surprising me. But maybe things were already complicated before either of us said a word. He gave a small, sad nod of recognition. I didn't expect to feel this drawn to someone again. Not now. Not like this." I looked down at my hands, my thumb tracing the chipped rim of my favorite coffee mug. "Me neither." We both sat there teetering on the edge of something neither of us knew how to define. The rules had changed, but the map hadn't been drawn yet. And then quietly, he reached across the table and touched my hand. It wasn't a grab or a demand. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was just a simple human connection, his hand covering mine, warm, real, steady. I froze for a second, not out of fear, but out of a profound sense of awe at how long it had been since someone had touched me without expectation, without history. Just presence. "I miss being near someone who listens," he said, his voice quiet, almost breaking. Who sees me?" I looked up at him, at this kind, heartbroken man, and for the first time I didn't see Diane's husband. I saw Peter, a man unraveling and rebuilding himself all at once, and something deep inside me, a place that had been locked away and gathering dust for 9 years, softened in response. "I see you," I whispered. He didn't lean in, he didn't pull me close. He just sat there with me, his hand over mine, both of us holding a silence that was too fragile, too sacred to break. Eventually, the old grandfather clock chimed in the living room, marking the hour. He glanced toward it and stood slowly. "I should go," he said. "I think I need to figure some things out." I walked him to the door again, my heart feeling heavy, but strangely light at the same time. Before stepping out, he turned to me one last time. "Would it be okay if I came by again? Just to talk?" I just nodded. Of course. He left then, and I stood at my open door with my hand resting on the frame, feeling the faint warmth of his touch still lingering on my skin. Something had begun. And even though we didn't have a name for it, I knew deep down that we had both crossed into a new uncharted territory, not a place of recklessness, not a place of forbidden passion, just a quiet, uncharted space. And suddenly I wasn't afraid to see where it would lead. The days that followed were quiet, but they were no longer empty. Peter didn't come by every day. Sometimes it was just a wave from across the yard as he took out the trash, a brief shared smile when our paths crossed at the mailbox. But when he did come over, we sat and we talked. About nothing. About everything. About his childhood memories of fishing with his father, about my favorite novels, about the books he brought over that we never actually read. We talked about things that didn't feel important at the time, but that were slowly, carefully filling the air between us with a sense of warmth, safety, and a profound, unspoken recognition. He never pressed. I never asked. We just shared space. Then one evening, just as the sky was folding itself into the soft, deep blue of twilight, I heard that now familiar knock again. When I opened the door, he wasn't holding books or anything else in his hands. He looked calm, but there was something new behind his eyes, a kind of quiet resolution. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside wordlessly and let him pass. He stood in my living room for a moment, his hands in his pockets, gazing around as if he'd never really seen the room before. "Diane called," he said, finally, his voice flat. "She wants to talk. We're going to meet next week when she gets back in town." "But I think it's just to make things official." I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and understanding move through me. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't grieve it either. I just heard it. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, not just for him, but for the long shared history that was now ending. For what was lost between them, for what could never quite be repaired. He just nodded. "I thought I'd feel more broken," he said, his voice full of a quiet wonder. "But the truth is being here talking with you, It's helped me face some things I never wanted to admit to myself." He took a deep breath, then walked toward the window and looked out at the darkening yard. "Do you ever wonder if some people come into our lives not to stay, but just to show us something we've forgotten about ourselves?" "All the time," I said quietly. He turned back to face me then. "Marlene." "I don't know what this is. I don't know what it means yet, but being with you, it just feels honest. Uncomplicated, even when it is complicated. You remind me that I'm still human, still capable of feeling something real." My throat tightened. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something I hadn't dared to let myself believe until that very moment. He wasn't asking me for a promise. He wasn't asking me for permission to start something new. He was simply offering a truth. "I'm not looking for a replacement for what I had," I said, stepping a little closer. "And I'm not expecting any answers. But I do know what it feels like to sit across from someone and not feel so alone anymore." He didn't say anything. He just reached out again, that same quiet, profound gesture, his hand finding mine in the dim light. And this time, I didn't hesitate. My fingers intertwined with his. We sat on the couch together, not wrapped in a passionate embrace, not tangled in confusion, but just sitting. Close, present, safe. The cicadas began their nightly chorus outside. A warm breeze rolled through the open window, carrying the sweet, heavy scent of the lilac bushes from my garden. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek lightly against the top of my head. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to begin, or grieving something that had ended. I just felt here. When he left that night, he kissed my cheek just once. A soft, warm, and meaningful press of his lips against my skin. And as I stood at the door watching his silhouette disappear into the dark, I didn't feel shaken like I had before. I felt still. I felt seen. I felt in the quietest, most profound way alive. Maybe that's what this was always about. Not a beginning, not an ending, but a return. A return to myself. A return to the present. A return to something real.